Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Royal Blue Podcast. My name is Joe Thomas. I'm the Echo's Everton FC correspondent, and alongside me, we've got our long-term contributor, Gav Buckland, and my colleague, Matt Jones. Lads, how you doing? You okay?
Fine, Joe. Thanks. Fine.
Matt,
yeah,
how you
very
on?
well. Very well. It's not long to go now, is it?
Really is closing in, isn't it? Fortnight. We're recording this on Friday lunchtime. Fortnight until the big kickoff. We may as well start there pretty much and work our way backwards. Obviously, there's a little bit to talk about. It's actually been what is an unusually quiet week for Everton, really, I think, in terms of, obviously, we know that some of the transfer stuff has kind of gone on in the background. Albil El-Toure, who was on Everton's radar, but were they ever really that close is probably unlikely. It looks like he's about to join Atalanta. Obviously, there was the draw at Bolton on Tuesday, which you could take some positives from, you could take some negatives from as well, depending on which way you're inclined. But Gav, I'll start with you. Obviously, we've got ages left to go until the transfer window itself closes, but we've got 2 weeks now, 2 weeks until the big kickoff against Fulham. Just where are you at the minute? Where's your head at with Everton?
Funny enough, I've just been speaking to somebody else about this before we came on, and their response was, I don't know whether to be worried or not. I think that's probably my stance at this moment in time. Is I'm neutral. I think in 7 days' time it might be slightly more definite either way. I just got to see how things play out during the course of the week. I don't want to say I think it's a well-known fact that I think we all want to see 3 or 4 players coming through the door, and what we got left, 5 weeks, is it something like that? 4 weeks? It's quite a relatively short time space, and so I'm neutral at the moment, but that's like the weather, Joe, that is changeable.
How about yourself, Matt?
Yeah, I'm probably quite similar, to be honest. I want to go over old ground. We went over on Monday. I think there's still gaps in the squad. For me, one of them is at centre-back, 100%. I'm still very worried about that situation, and at the top end of the pitch as well. I think that Sunday when we signed Danjuma and then the stories came out about Toure, I think sort of internally you thought, right, we're quite close to not being sorted there, but getting on our way to having a much better attack. And obviously the Toure stuff has fizzled out. It looks like he's on his way to Italy now. And as much as it's nice to see pictures of Danjuma in training today, it's nice to see bits of Dominic Calvert-Lewin as well, although I'm not entirely sure how far along he is yet. It still looks likely that going into that first game of the season, it's going to be Danjuma starting at the top end of the pitch on his own, potentially Maupay starting at the top end of the pitch on his own, and that is a little bit worrying because Danjuma is a good player, but is he a lone striker? Probably not. We've all seen what Neal Maupay has to offer there as well, so it is a little bit worrying. But I think that the big hope for us all is that the pre-season under Sean Dyche and some time to work under Sean Dyche is going to uplift the quality of the squad overall. Hopefully they'll be more organised. Hopefully they'll be fitter. But I don't know if that's necessarily enough to offset the lack of quality and lack of depth that there are in key positions. I think being fitter, being more organised will get you somewhere, but is it enough to get this Everton team and get their head above the relegation line? I'm not quite sure that they're yet. I think they probably need 1 or 2 more quality additions in places in the squad where they are really short.
It's interesting you say that because I was at Bolton on Tuesday night alongside our colleague Conor O'Neill, and that kind of almost that sense of Everton purgatory or limbo where you're not quite sure where you stand was definitely the case. Now, I think it's clear to see, for myself, having spoke with Ashley Young after the Wigan game last weekend, and he was talking about how tough Dyche's pre-season was. Didn't say it's the toughest he's ever had. Didn't say Gaffer's Day was the hardest he'd ever done. He said he actually referred to his time in Italy under Conte and suggested that was probably the hardest he'd been worked. But he said this was up there. And then we saw against Bolton on Tuesday. I quite enjoyed this, actually. You could tell Everton were going to make 8 substitutes at half-time because 8 of the first 11 stayed on the pitch, and for 15 minutes they were basically just made to sprint from one end of the box from one box to the other to make sure that they got their full workout. So I mean, they're clearly being tested. I think fitness, we can take for granted. Everton are going to be one of the fittest sides going into the new Premier League season, and I do also think it's important to state that there seems to be an awareness within the Everton coaching team that fitness isn't just about running the lads ragged for all the way up until the first game of the season. There is an awareness there that they need to get them to peak condition rather than just completely risk burning them out. So they'll be fit. And in my match report after the game, I tried to take a little bit more of a positive slant in the sense that from the Wigan and the Bolton games, you could just see perhaps a bit more of cohesion. Although Everton played slightly different formations and with slightly different players in both games, and they didn't score a plethora of goals either, they were attacking and defending in a far more intelligent and coherent way than they were at the back end of last season when, if I'm honest, it felt like obviously Everton got the job done. It felt like they got the job done through set pieces, Dwight McNeil's magic left foot, and Abdoulaye Doucouré just forcing his way through defences and his boundless energy paying off. Certainly with the introduction of Ashley Young and how he's interacting with the likes of Alex Iwobi, it just felt like Everton were getting up the pitch a lot better, a lot more. You've got players who can carry the ball. They've got interactions between players, interlinking, getting up there. Neil Maupay, rather than as we saw for so much of last season, just having long balls hammered at him for 90 minutes. He was dropping deep, picking up the ball, winning free kicks, trying to turn and release Iwobi down the right. There looked like there could be a template there that with better players, some of which are within the squad, if they come in, they could start. If you played Danjuma where Dobbin was off Maupay, and you had Calvert-Lewin up front instead of Maupay, you could see how it could work and actually be potentially quite effective. But as you two have both alluded to, we have the massive caveats that Everton don't currently have the players there to whatever their fitness is and whatever system they're playing is. It doesn't feel a huge amount of confidence. Obviously, Calvert-Lewin's training. We know he's trained hard. We also know the very maximum amount of minutes he's now going to get before he kicks the ball before the start of the season is 180. And he's not going to play 90 minutes in both games, is he? And that goes for quite a few of the outfield players as well. Gav, in terms of all the pre-seasons that you've watched as a fan over the years, how important do you think it is that players get match, albeit friendly, get some degree of competitive minutes in their tank? So, it's Stoke tomorrow. Say Dominic Calvert-Lewin doesn't play at all. He is continuing to train hard. Would you have concerns that he hasn't been playing 11-a-side football in a competitive environment consistently building into the new season? Or do you actually think it's more important what he's doing at Finch Farm?
That's a good question. I don't know, Joe. In terms, I suppose it depends on the player and where they are in terms of with their fitness. I think ideally you've got to have at least one game, haven't you, before the start of the season? It's interesting. So that's what the question is. Yeah, definitely. You've got to have one game. I think it's taken as a given. You've got to work hard at Finch Farm anyway. So let's get that right. But I think one game pre-season is definitely valuable. But it's interesting to say when you're saying about gaffers playing fitness, I think there's a belief within the game, isn't it, that actually they're not at full fitness at the start of the season, are they? The players are at their only reach sort of Premier League fitness in the weekend after the September international break. So it takes them probably about a month after the start of the season for players to be, at optimum fitness. And I think that's what we're building towards. So you are right. We don't want everybody totally knackered, do you, by the opening day of the season. And I think in that regard, I think it's important to have at least one game, get yourself on the pitch, at least to show fans that actually you're in contention at the start of the season. In Calvert-Lewin's case, isn't it really? And from the murmurs that you hear and stuff, is that may not necessarily be the case. So yeah, important for the fans, I think, to somebody to play before the start of the season, if not the player, will be my answer.
Matt, going into Stoke on Saturday, is there anything that you haven't seen in pre-season so far that you really, really want to see in that game? Bearing in mind it's the penultimate opportunities for players to be getting on that pitch.
I mean, is it too obvious to just say goals? It's one of them, isn't it? Where you talked about some of the crisp passing football that Everton played on Tuesday night. Was it at Bolton?
Bolton, yeah.
And that's great, and it looked lovely, and those Mopé dropping off the front, McNeil getting in field, and it was all nice. And as someone who didn't watch the game live, I saw the video of that Iwobi chance in inverted commas, and I didn't know what had happened with it. I was like, oh, this is great, this is really nice link up play, and then you get to the end bit, and it's like, oh, it's just a scuffed block shot, and like there's a chance there for Iwobi to either shoot himself and finish, or play an incisive pass across. I think it's to Lewis Dobbin, who was racing through on the left hand side for a tap in, and he kind of does neither. And it's like, well, that does sort of sum up Everton's problems in a nutshell. Because as much as those passing moves and everything were really nice, and there's 2 or 3 of them, wasn't there, in the first half of that game, where they built out from the back, they played through the lines, and they got into good positions. Are Everton going to play like that at Villa away in week 2? I don't think so. Are they going to be taking the ball on the edge of their own box in games in the Premier League against teams who are better, who are more likely to punish your mistakes if you lose the ball, who are going to press you higher and be more capable of doing that? I'm not sure. I think the style changed probably quite significantly away from that. So it's tough to read too much into that. But I think on Saturday, I mean, away from the obvious, you'd like to see Calvert-Lewin get minutes, of course. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with Jared Branthwaite and James Garner as well. They've come back from busy summers, and the manager would have had a good chance this week to have a look at Branthwaite again. We were talking on Monday, weren't we, about Dyche would have had one session with him, I think, by the time he'd recorded that podcast. And you might love him, you might not like him at all. We'll have to wait and see. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they feature and how they play, because I think both of those players are in contention, certainly, aren't they, to start in week 1, you'd say, although they're not guaranteed nailed on to start. And I think it'll also be interesting to see which of the youngsters are involved still. I think it's probably a bit of a surprise that Lewis Dobbin got a start on Tuesday. Maybe the manager saw something in him he's liked and thought, I'll give him a bit of a go. Obviously, we've seen a lot of young players leave the club this summer. We've seen a few go out on loan this week who we clearly decided aren't ready for this level yet, or need more frequent minutes. So maybe if we get Tom Cannon gets a game, if Dobbin gets a game, if some of us get a game, albeit off the bench or in the starting 11, then maybe it'll just give us a little bit of an insight into Sean Dyche looking at those, thinking, you'll do to stick around for the remainder of the season. So, and of course, finally, Arnaud Danjuma, great to see him in training today, getting involved, seemingly quite happy and content with things. It's nice to see someone pick up the ball, beat a few players, run at defenders, take a few shots, all those sorts of things. And, listen, I know Ashley Young's come in and it seems like an astute sign, and I think we can all accept that. I think it gives everybody a lift, doesn't it, when you get a new forward player in? And it's always nice in those first few weeks when a new signing comes in, and whatever they do and whatever happens on the pitch, no matter how well or how poorly they play, they get applauded and they get that grace period, don't they, from the fans, and Danjuma is about to get that. So that'll be nice, and hopefully he can start it off with a goal or two on Saturday in the Potteries.
Absolutely. Definitely going to be interesting. One of the things you mentioned there is insight into Sean Dyche's thoughts, which is something that we haven't had a lot of in this pre-season. Obviously, spoke after the game against Neon.
Yeah, well, one thing I was going to say, actually, which you mentioned before, I think Ashley Young saying that it's not the hardest pre-season he's ever had. I can imagine Sean Dyche taking that as a personal affront, to be honest. And, Young's only got a 1-year deal, so he might have done everybody else next summer after he's got off a bit of a disservice there, because Gaffer's Day might be even harder after that revelation, mightn't it?
Yeah, it could well be. But, yeah, I mean, the insight is going to be, because obviously, having been to the last 2 games now, Bolton and Wigan, one thing we haven't had, and there's no commitment to it. There's nothing that says it's not mandatory, but myself and the other journalists haven't had the opportunity to ask questions of any of the coaching team. Obviously, Sean Dyche didn't even turn up to the game at Wigan. He was there against Bolton on Tuesday night, but again, it was player who was put up in that case. It was Michael Keane, your favourite, Matt, who was doing the media duties after that game as well. So it's going to be interesting, because I think one thing that we haven't had for a while is anything insightful from Dyche. So I'm not sure that he necessarily provide anything that he's not willing to go into. But I think we all know the questions that he's going to ask if the likes of myself and others do get the opportunity to speak to him after the game at the Britannia, and they'll be, precisely where is Dominic Calvert-Lewin up to? I suspect we'll get a vague answer in relation to that. And the other things that you'd ask him about would be about things like transfers and where Everton are going next and what role he is playing in it. Is he completely leaving it all to Dan Purdy and Kevin Fowler? Is he having a say? Is he, the club have gone into great detail at various points over the past 7 months about how the process works, as they've been, coming out to explain the process and try and defend what they've done, and also, stand up if you fire Mashiri for Bill Kenwright's role in the club and where his expertise apparently lies. I think one thing that's clear, Gav, is that, we look at the last January transfer window and obviously nobody came in and it was shambolic. Probably, you could rule that as a one-off due to exceptional circumstances to some degree because Everton, as a club was in a mess at the time, wasn't it? Are you starting to get a little bit of fear that for all the efforts of the recruitment team, we might end up in a scenario similar to last summer where Everton go into a new season with a clear problem that has been identified by everybody for some time, but where the solution hasn't been found, and then all of a sudden, what would effectively be for the third transfer window in a row, you end up sacrificing games because haven't been able to get the business done early?
You're talking about having another striker, Joe, yeah?
Essentially, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, do you sacrifice games? You make your game less chance of winning. Possibly. We're pointing out here at Calvert-Lewin's, what's he got, 12 goals in 50 Premier League games, so it's not exactly a goal-a-game striker, is he? I get the idea that, that you're maybe not as strong as you are in the opening 3 or 4 games, but I personally would never use the word sacrifice. I don't think anybody sacrifices a game. I am going back on your point, though. It is quite clear, isn't it, where the issue is, and I don't even think it's, recruitment team, Thelwell, Purdy. It's the people making the financial decisions at the club who are informing our transfer activity, aren't they? In that, there is only a limited amount of cash that we have at this moment in time to spend. So if you want to buy a player, we will only be able to release £5 million this year for them. So you either buy a player for £5 million, or in Touré's case, you pay £5 million down and then £5 million for each the next 3 or 4 years. So I think the decision making's outside of the football people within the club. It's the people holding the finances ultimately have got the power here, and that's why we've seen such inactivity, probably less than what we're expecting, because at the moment, maybe on the transfer window, it's a seller's market, isn't it? If you've got somebody really wants, then they've got to pay. They've got to pay to suit your needs. At some point in the next 3 or 4 weeks, that's going to change, where it becomes near the end of the transfer market, where people have got players who are at the club that they want to get rid of. All of a sudden, that'll flip to become a buyer's market. And I think that's therefore where I would expect, on what we've seen so far about how much cash we've got available, I think as it becomes more of a buyer's market towards the end of the transfer window, where there's a few people that clubs have got players that they expect to get rid of, but they haven't, I think that's when I'd expect us to do our business based on what I've seen so far, in terms of the way we want our deal structured. So it could be, going back to your point, that the opening day of the season, or even the second game of the season, we won't have a full squad because we haven't got the cash to get deals over the line beforehand. And the irony is here, isn't it? We spoke for a couple of years that our issues are with profit and sustainability, but I think it's acknowledged that we're coming out of that period, that period of massive overspending and what that means. We're actually coming out of that period a little bit. The problem now is cash, which is another aspect of it, really. And so, yeah, I think I think we'll be the same this season as what we were last season at the start. But I do expect some movement between the opening day and the transfer deadline window.
Matt,
sorry, Joe, maybe that's informing some of that Dyche's pre-season, but we were talking about last week.
Matt, I mean, if it was, even if it's legitimate reasons, or to some extent, obviously the one bit of insight we probably have had from the club this week is something that I think we've known and been writing for quite some time is that the financial situation has meant that Everton can only put small down payments down on players and heavily structure things. And been reading what myself and some of the others have been writing over the past month when we've been linked with Albert Altore, when we've been linked with Willie Gnonto as well. The other kind of more the landmark signing that Everton would have to pay money for. That's always been the big caveat that these are clubs that want to get as much money as possible for those players, and in that circumstance, it's not favourable to Everton if there's somebody else that's interested, and that's always been the case of Albert Altore. Obviously, there was a lot of talk about things last Sunday and reaching advanced stages and things like that. Well, obviously, Everton were always playing second fiddle to Atalanta, weren't they? I think. Despite everything that Gav says there, obviously this situation is something that's been known about all summer, you would think, for those who are making those decisions. Do you think that if that is the case, Matt, it's acceptable that you can give them the benefit, give those who are at the very top of the club the benefit of the doubt and say, you know what, if the majority of the business has to wait till the end of the transfer window, but that's good business. I mean, do you think that that's a good policy, or do you think they should have kind of amended their strategy accordingly just to make sure they were as strong as possible when the season kicked off?
I mean, it sort of feels like they're at a point now where they have to do that, don't they? And I think Gav articulated it really well there, because there's so many layers to the situation that Everton find themselves in now, isn't there? Like, everybody knows and has known for the best part of 18 months now that this team needs a centre forward to compete with, replace, whatever you want to say, Dominic Calvert-Lewin. We've known that for absolutely ages. But how can you go and get a player in who can do all the things that Dom does, like we discussed on Monday, when you've got no money, when you're up against the wall in terms of FFP, profit and sustainability rules, whatever, and when you finished 17th, 16th in your last two seasons in the Premier League? It's like a football manager challenge, this, isn't it? Your team just avoided relegation by the skin of its teeth last year. Go into this situation where you've got no money, your club's been, financially mismanaged, keep them up again. And I think sort of the way in which you get around that really is by, I think the only way you really get around that and get players in through the early stages of the window is through truly elite scouting. And I mean, like Brighton level scouting, where you go in and get players from all over the world who no one's really heard. Someone like a Mitoma and at that level, was it 2.5 million he cost them? And that's one way around it. But Everton have shown no real insight into that kind of market, or no real desire to go and explore that type of market. I mean, the one sort of gem they uncovered last summer, you could say, was Amadou Onana, but he wasn't like a player that nobody knew about. He'd been strongly linked with West Ham and a couple of other sides. So it is really difficult. And I think for a club like Everton and the way in which they've gone about things, it's really tough, because it's great being able to say, well, we looked at Mikhailo Mudryk and we looked at Mohamed Kudus and we looked at all these players who have gone on to be really good, or look like they're going to go on to be really good. But in the grand scheme of things, I think a lot of these lads are quite well known, are going to cost a lot of money, and Everton simply haven't got that. So it does feel a little bit like we're going to have to hang on until the end of the window. The one area where I would be disappointed in, where you'd be critical again, is that if Everton went and did something like what they did with Neil Maupay at the end of the last window, because what they did there was they went and spent a decent chunk of money, was it around £15 million, on a player who was just so ill-suited to the way that the team was going to play, and was in no way, shape or form a replacement for the fella who they were going to build their attack around. That just felt like a bit of he's available, he's got Premier League experience, we've kind of run out of options a little bit. Let's just get him in for 15 million. I think if they do go and bring in a striker for a similar amount of money between now and the end of the transfer window, they need to be a bit more considered and a bit more calm, which the way in which they go about it. All the words are in there. Sorry.
It's interesting.
Joe, sorry, can I just make another point, Joe?
Yeah,
about it. Yeah, and I'm just wondering whether the delays in the MSP deal have come into play here. That I think we all know that the Premier League, the first significant batch of money was paid over. I think the Friday before last, and I'm just wondering, because of the delays in the MSP deal, whether some money that the club, obviously the MSP deal money is going to go on the stadium, whether the club we're going to use some of that on players, but because of delays in getting the funding for the stadium, they've had to divert that to the stadium, because the MSP money is not there. And I'm just speculating at this point, but I'm not sure in the great scheme. I think the delays in the MSP deal and getting that over the line has meant the clubs had to commit more money to the stadium than what they originally anticipating over the summer. And maybe that comes into play. Either way, the delays in the MSP money has not helped us, has it, really?
Possibly. I think it was a couple of weeks ago, I was doing a story in relation to speaking to people that were close to the deal, and it was always expected at that point it was going to be August before anything got over the line, which is problematic. Of course it is, and I think this is an issue we'll probably discuss next week or the week after. But there's clearly a big issue that's going on with the interim board and how long is interim. And the question when I asked it, say a couple of weeks ago, was probably, after the start of the season, back end of August, beginning of September. And then the issue that kind of flows from that is, well, is Bill Kenwright still there at the beginning of the season? And if he is still there at the beginning of the season, does he take his seat in the director's box? Does he not? And all of a sudden we're back in that whole, really contentious and difficult situation, marring the beginning of a new season after it had such an impact on the last one. And that's one that I think we do need to touch on, albeit perhaps in a week or two. Obviously the MSP money is due to sort the stadium out. Obviously there's already a tranche of money that came in from the Andy Bell loan that came in at the beginning of the summer, and my understanding with that was to kind of pay off the last set of bills that were due in relation to the stadium. So I don't think that the rug has been pulled from beneath anyone for lack of funds. I think Everton are dealing with. I think they were always going to have a very restricted budget. Sean Dyche was uncertain from the final whistle at Bournemouth whether or not he was going to have to sell to buy, but it was clear that he was aware it was a distinct possibility. So I don't think the parameters in which Everton are operating have necessarily changed over the course of the summer yet. I think some of the things that Matt says are kind of quite poignant in his last answer, in the sense that obviously the idea of going and doing the Brighton and scouting young talent from around and picking up for next to nothing is. There's probably two answers to that from Everton's perspective. First and foremost, obviously, a couple of months ago, they picked up Lee Sargison from Brighton, who's now Everton's head of scouting operations. So they have actually shown a desire to go and perhaps copy that model. And Kevin Thelwell, one of the things he's tried to do over the 18 months is try and build towards creating an Everton that's more sustainable for the future. The unfortunate thing that Kevin Thelwell has had to deal with is the fact that he has had the rug pulled from beneath him, because absolutely every other part of the structure around him has collapsed. And I guess Cameron Matoma might have cost Brighton £2.5 million. Everton don't have a handful of £2.5 million to gamble on players that are in the minor leagues, and they perhaps require a little bit of adaptation first. I think 3 or 4 years ago, they could maybe do that deal 4 times, and if only one of them comes off, they'd say it's good business. They've had a worldie. They haven't. I think we saw at the beginning of the window. I don't think Dyche necessarily wanted to keep Conor Cody, but we have discussed how that might have solved for £4.5 million. There's an option to very early on solve a problem that was clearly going to grow throughout the summer, and they didn't do it, and that's probably indicative of a lack of finances. So they're probably trapped. They don't have enough money to gamble on the completely unknown unknown player, because they need results straight away and they don't have, excess money. They also don't have the money to go out and buy established players, which just leaves them in that kind of murky world of, you want players that Sean Dyche can be comfortable and confident can do a job at this level, but for whatever reason have become so out of favour that they are within Everton's financial remit. I suppose that's where Arno Danjuma fits in. We know that he has Champions League pedigree. He scored against Juventus. He scored against Bayern. As Villarreal reached the latter stages. But since then, he's also had a couple of bad years where, in particular, obviously, he wasn't wanted at Villarreal last season. He went to Tottenham and didn't make an impact. Obviously, Tottenham are a club that are as messy as Everton, perhaps, if not more. It wasn't an ideal. I think he probably look back on that and think it was a bit of a mistake. But that's why he's in a situation where Everton have been able to get him. I guess it's finding those, isn't it, really? And doing so in an early stage in the market is probably difficult. I guess the other thing that Everton need to do, and this is where they're probably having difficulty, is one thing that could accelerate their activity in the transfer market is by getting rid of more players. And we know there's interest in Damari Gray. I think it's likely that Everton would accept anything that's a considered bid for him. Same with Mason Holgate. But this is, again, the problem, and it harks back to recruitment problems from the years that have gone by. You need clubs to want to come in and take these players off Everton first before you can do anything else, and that's part of the problem, isn't it? So,
yeah, I feel I'm not relaxed. Maybe isn't the right word, but I'm not sat here. I'm not sat here saying like Everton should just go and like spend money now, and not really think of the consequences because we desperately need it, because we'll be in this situation again in a couple of years. The club needs to be sensible now, and I understand everybody out there, myself included, is just look at this squad going, my word, we've known about this strike situation for years. How have we not sorted it? But I think that the situation is, for me personally, the situation in terms of the finances is obviously a lot worse than I realised, because I looked at the situation in January when we sold Anthony Gordon. We obviously got money for Moise Kean through. We've sold Sims this summer. We've sold Samuel Smith this summer as well. We've sold a lot of players there, and the money has gone straight onto the balance sheet in terms of pure profit. And they're still in this situation clear. All the noises coming out the football club. And, they might make us look daft by going and just paying, a load of money for a striker in a couple of weeks, and then coming out and letting us all know that actually the finances we're not as bad as we thought. But the noises would suggest that they still need to be careful despite that. And it's horrible and it's frustrating. But if they go out and just spend money rashly again in the next few weeks, then we're just going to be sat here again next summer and the summer after in the same situation thinking we acted a bit recklessly there, and now we're paying the consequences for it. This now, like this moment we're in now, is the product of all those summers down the years where we went, it's not my money, I don't care. I don't care where it comes from, pay these players, whatever, they're better than what we've got, all those things, and you don't really think too far down the line. Like, this is the collateral from that reckless spending. And I don't want us to be here again in 2 or 3 years' time when we've moved into a new stadium and we're hopefully still a Premier League team. So it's frustrating, it's horrible. I want to see loads of new faces in and get excited about the new campaign, but they've got to be sensible about this, and it's annoying, but it feels like the way forward.
It's clearly a tricky situation because balanced against that, they also need to make sure they stay in the Premier League, and they've only just done that for 2 years in a row, and I think they've lost 10 players from the squad, compared to the one that finished the season. Gav, against this backdrop, obviously every penny counts. You're trying to squeeze as much as you can from what you currently got. Are you slightly surprised to see Lewis Warrington and Stanley Mills go out on loan? Not necessarily them go out on loan, but to have done so with 4.5 weeks of the transfer window remaining, and there being a bit of uncertainty as to what gaps Everton are going to be able to plug.
No, I think in there, I spoke about Lewis Warrington, didn't I, a couple of weeks ago. I mean, he's got a year left on his deal. No, I think the players in their development are not Premier League players, are they? I think we can talk about the pitfalls of academy football till the cows come home, and the thing that fills the gap is a loan at another club, really, and they make full sense to me. I think if they were any good, I'm going to say any good, that's probably not the right phrase. If they had the potential to be Premier League players next season, I think they'd still be in Everton. Now, the obviously thinking is that they aren't, and I think Warrington certainly probably, I doubt ever will be. I'd be surprised given his career development. And I think it makes sense to put them out on loan and get back into get them playing football, and at the end, if neither of them make it, hopefully there's some money we can get back for them. So it makes a hell of a lot of sense, really, for me. It's rather than be on loan and playing academy football. At least it gets them out there, getting minutes on the clock, and maybe creating a market for selling them at some point in the future. Certainly in Warrington's case, Stanley Mills is slightly different. But if they have Premier League potential, they'd be at Everton at the moment.
You say that, I'm not convinced quite so much. I think that Everton has probably been as bad a club as they could have been for a youngster trying to break through in the past 18 months, because there just hasn't been an opportunity for pressure-free minutes. If we're honest, there probably isn't going to be an opportunity for pressure-free minutes, certainly in the first few months of this season. Yeah, I think, I like both of the players. Obviously, neither of them have any Premier League experience. That's an issue. But when Sean Dyche and Kevin Farwell offer Tom Davis a new contract and he turns them down, that suggests to me that they think they're a body short in centre midfield. Now, at the minute, they may well be. Now, at the minute, I think that with what little funds they do have, central midfield is probably low down the pecking order, low down the shopping list of issues to get resolved. So I wouldn't have minded seeing Lewis Warrington just kind of staying in and around the squad, just in case he can do a job, just at back end of matches or early rounds of the Carling Cup, that type of thing. Just until and I know obviously the Championship, the Football League clubs are looking to get out. Their season starts early. They want to get things in line for that, but. I just would rather see these players leave once Everton have sorted their own squad out first, just in case they can do a job. Matt, probably this will be my last question, but at least where Gav's right is obviously, Warrington has only played as high as League One at the moment. Stan Mills had no senior experience so far other than the limited amount that he's had with Everton, and therefore you can understand why this would make sense from a career progression point of view. The one player that Everton have got that kind of falls in between those models is Tom Cannon, who there's a hell of a lot of interest around at the minute. Would you be disappointed if you saw Tom Cannon go out before a striker comes in? This is a player who scored, he's clearly very, very good at the under-21s level, top of his class in that respect. Gone out to the Championship and scored 8 goals and 20 appearances there. So that's, as close to the Premier League as you're going to get before getting a berth in the Premier League. Do you think he can do a job this season? Do you think that Everton at the very least should hold on to him until other solutions are brought into the club just in case?
Yeah, well, just before I answer that, I'll tell you what, Gav's written off Lewis Warrington and Stanley Mills there, hasn't he? Yeah, he's just... I'm
just saying, Matt, from my own experience about where players should be at that age. If they're going to make it and what they should be doing,
I also think that. Go on, sorry.
No, I think that's it. It's as simple as for me. I think if you're not knocking on the door at how old's Warrington? Is he 20, 21 in October? Yeah. Jared Branthwaite's only 6 months younger. 6 months older. Sorry. You have a look at Branthwaite's career path over the last 12 to 18 months, 2 years.
But I also think like the developments of these lads aren't always.
I got that. Yeah.
And in the same sense, and I think Warrington's got a year left, but the club have got an option for an extension, haven't they? They can extend his deal in the same way that they could have done they have done with Decore this summer. And I think you're probably right. I think they're probably both not quite at that level yet. But I also look at it and think, well, if the club were convinced about that, then they probably would have just moved them on permanently this summer. And I think maybe the fact they've given them loan deals in a funny sort of way points towards the fact that maybe they're not ready to completely write them off yet.
It's a fork in the road, isn't it? Or they could argue, say that's the next part of saying, listen, these are quite good at that level, so therefore we'll get a fee for them. I know what would be one. I know it's a separate pod, I know, but where they are, I doubt. I always think if you're I always think the best players miss out academy football anyway. But I think if you're not knocking on the door when you're 19, 20 at a Premier League team and in the academy, I think it's very, very difficult for you to break through after that time. That probably shows you have got the talent.
No, that's fair enough. And just to answer your question about Tom Cannon, Joe, I wouldn't want to move him on before we bring somebody in, because we did that with Ella Sims last summer, didn't we? And listen, again, probably a player who's not Premier League level, but it just felt like we looked a little bit daft when we were playing Anthony Gordon and Damari Gray up front for the first 5 games of the season, and we had nobody on the bench to even throw on, because because Tom Cannon, you look at it now and you say there's a lot of interest in him. Will that interest not be there anymore if the Premier League season's had 3 games? It's still going to be there. If he sits on the bench for the first three games of the season and Danjuma plays up front, there'll still be teams that will want to take him on loan despite that, and because of what he did last season. So I don't think there's any rush to make any kind of decision on him. Have a look over the next couple of games, see what he's like in training, and whether he can make an impact in the early weeks of the season. That is, of course, notwithstanding of everything going sign 2 centre forwards in the next week, and he's well down the pecking order. So no rush at all, I think, to make a decision on what's going on with Tom Cannon.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think they should keep hold of him. I say on, Warrington and Mills. I just think Everton hasn't been a place that's been conducive for young talent over the last 18 months or so. I'm not sure. So I I think they both have potential. Obviously, Mills signed a 3-year contract back in September, so there's clear. There may well be a pathway for him, but he obviously needs senior football first, and I think Oxford will be a good move for him. Right, that's been it. That's it for today. Thanks very much for listening. Thanks very much for joining us. Obviously, we're on a Friday now, so I'll be off to Stoke with Connor tomorrow. Hopefully, we'll be able to bring you back some good news from there, both in terms of some insight from the management team and hopefully some goals and a good performance for Monday's pod. Thanks very much for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful weekend. Keep smiling. Thank you.